Viking winter. Survival, ancient wisdom for modern times. The fire died at midnight, and death crept closer with every passing hour. This was the reality that greeted countless Viking families as temperatures plummeted to bone-crushing lows across the frozen landscapes of Scandinavia, Iceland, and Greenland, where survival meant more than just staying warm. It meant outsmarting nature itself with nothing but raw intelligence and sheer determination. Picture yourself transported back 1,000 years, stripped of every modern comfort you take for granted. No thermostat to adjust when you feel a chill. No electric blanket to wrap yourself in. No insulated walls to shield you from winds that could freeze exposed skin in minutes. Just you, your family, and the unforgiving Nordic winter that claimed more lives than any battlefield ever could. The Vikings faced this brutal reality every single year, and they did more than just survive. They thrived, building entire civilizations in some of the harshest environments on Earth, conquering not just foreign lands, but the very elements themselves through ingenious methods that modern survival experts still study and implement today. These were not the romanticized warriors of Hollywood films lounging in grand halls between raids. These were everyday people, farmers who worked frozen soil, fishermen who braved icy seas, mothers who kept their children alive through months of darkness, and elders who passed down life-saving knowledge through stories told around flickering hearths. What made them extraordinary was not their strength alone, though they certainly possessed that in abundance, but their ability to transform the simplest materials, earth, stone, wool, and fire, into sophisticated survival systems that meant the difference between a thriving settlement and a collection of frozen corpses come spring. The knowledge they accumulated over centuries of trial and error, paid for in blood and suffering, created a blueprint for cold weather survival that remains remarkably relevant in our modern age of climate uncertainty, power grid failures, and growing interest in sustainable, off-grid living. Every technique they developed came from necessity, not convenience. When your children shiver through the night, despite every blanket you own, you learn to heat stones. When your food supply must last through months of snow, you master preservation. When your home offers little protection from Arctic winds, you literally bury it in the earth itself. These were not primitive people stumbling through darkness. They were engineers without degrees, architects without blueprints, and chemists without laboratories, understanding principles of thermodynamics, insulation, and food science through pure observation and experimentation across generations. The 5 survival techniques we will explore represent the pinnacle of Viking ingenuity, methods so effective that modern homesteaders, preppers, and survival enthusiasts continue to use variations of them today, proving that true wisdom transcends time and technology. The earth itself became their shield. When winter descended upon Viking settlements like a predator stalking its prey, the response was not to build higher or stronger against the elements, but to embrace the very ground beneath their feet as their greatest ally in the battle against cold. The turf house, known as a torfbear in Old Norse, represented one of the most ingenious architectural innovations of the Viking Age, a structure that seemed to grow from the earth itself rather than being built upon it, creating a harmony between human habitation and natural landscape that modern architects still struggle to achieve. Imagine walking across the Icelandic countryside in winter, snow blinding your vision, wind cutting through even the thickest clothing, and suddenly you see what appears to be a small hill with smoke rising from its peak. Only as you approach do you realize this is not a natural formation, but a home, a living space carved from and covered by the earth itself. The construction process began with selecting the perfect location. Not just any flat ground would suffice. The Vikings understood drainage, wind patterns, and sun exposure with an intuition born from generations of observation, choosing spots that would provide maximum protection while minimizing the effort required to maintain warmth. First came the foundation, often built from carefully selected stones that would not crack under the weight of tons of turf. These stones were fitted together without mortar, relying on precise placement and the weight of the materials above to create stability that could last centuries. The timber frame came next, and here the Vikings faced a unique challenge, especially in Iceland where trees were scarce and precious. Every piece of wood was carefully selected, shaped, and placed to provide maximum structural support with minimum material, creating frameworks that were marvels of efficiency. But the true genius lay in the walls themselves, layers upon layers of turf cut from the ground in specific patterns, each piece containing not just dirt but a complex ecosystem of roots, grasses, and moss that would continue to grow and strengthen the structure over time. These turf blocks were not randomly stacked, but carefully arranged in overlapping patterns, similar to modern brickwork but with a crucial difference. The living material would actually bond together over time, creating walls that became stronger rather than weaker as years passed. The thickness of these walls often exceeded 3 feet, sometimes reaching up to 6 feet in the coldest regions, providing insulation values that rival modern construction methods while using only natural renewable materials that required no manufacturing or transportation. Inside these earth-sheltered homes, the temperature remained remarkably stable, protected from both the fierce cold of winter and the occasional heat of summer, creating a microclimate that required minimal energy to maintain at livable temperatures. The interior layout reflected a deep understanding of thermal dynamics, with the main living space centered around a long fire pit that served multiple purposes: cooking, heating, lighting, and social gathering, all radiating from this central source of warmth and life. Sleeping areas were positioned strategically, close enough to benefit from the fire's warmth, but far enough to avoid smoke and sparks, often built as raised platforms that captured rising heat while keeping sleepers above the coldest air that settled near the floor. The smoke from the central hearth, rather than being a mere nuisance, served its own purposes, curing meats hung from the rafters, deterring insects, and even providing a degree of waterproofing to the wooden structural elements through the accumulation of creosote. Ventilation was carefully controlled through small openings that could be adjusted based on wind direction and intensity, a primitive but effective system that balanced the need for fresh air with the retention of precious heat, showing an understanding of airflow that many modern builders could learn from. The floors were often covered with layers of birch bark, dried grasses, or even flat stones, materials that could be easily replaced when they became soiled, while providing insulation from the cold ground below. A simple solution to a complex problem. Storage areas were built into the thick walls themselves, creating cupboards and shelves that benefited from the stable temperature while maximizing the usable space in what were often cramped quarters. Every cubic foot serving a purpose in these carefully designed homes. The integration of livestock spaces within, or directly adjacent to human living areas, might seem unsanitary by modern standards, but it represented a sophisticated understanding of symbiotic survival. Animal body heat, contributing to the overall warmth while humans provided protection and food for their animals. A single turf house could shelter multiple generations of a family, plus their most valuable livestock, through the harshest winters, creating a self-contained ecosystem where waste from one process became resources for another. Embodying sustainability principles we are only now rediscovering. The roofs deserved special mention. Constructed with overlapping layers of birch bark covered by turf, they shed water while providing additional insulation, and in summer, these living roofs bloomed with wildflowers and grasses, creating a visual harmony with the surrounding landscape that made Viking settlements seem to disappear into nature itself. Maintenance of these structures was an ongoing process, but one that strengthened community bonds. Neighbors helping neighbors to replace worn turf, repair timber frames, and prepare for each coming winter, creating social structures as resilient as the physical ones they maintained. The knowledge required to build and maintain these homes was passed down through generations, not through written manuals, but through hands-on experience. Young Vikings learning by doing, understanding not just the how, but the why of each construction technique. Modern archaeological excavations of Viking-age turf houses reveal a level of sophistication that challenges our preconceptions about medieval life, with evidence of underfloor heating channels, sophisticated drainage systems, and architectural innovations that would not become common in European construction for centuries. The legacy of these structures extends far beyond their historical significance. Modern ecological builders study Viking turf house construction for insights into sustainable architecture, finding principles that can be adapted to contemporary green building practices. In Iceland today, several reconstructed turf houses serve as museums and cultural centers, but more importantly, they demonstrate that these structures remain viable living spaces, comfortable and efficient even by modern standards when properly maintained. The psychological impact of living within the earth rather than upon it created a different relationship with the natural world, one where humans saw themselves as part of the landscape rather than separate from it, a philosophy that influenced Viking culture in ways we are only beginning to understand. When storms raged outside, turning the air into a lethal mixture of snow and wind, those within turf houses felt secure in their earth embrace. The walls that seemed so primitive to later observers, providing better protection than many modern structures would in similar conditions. The acoustic properties of these thick earth walls created an interesting phenomenon. The outside world muted to a whisper, while inside sounds remained clear, creating an intimate atmosphere that fostered the storytelling traditions for which Vikings became famous. During the long winter nights, when darkness lasted up to 20 hours in the far north, these earth-sheltered homes became universes unto themselves, places where myths were born, plans were made, and the cultural traditions that would influence European civilization for millennia were preserved and transmitted. The smell inside these homes, a mixture of smoke, wool, earth, and cooking food, might seem unpleasant to modern sensibilities, but for Vikings, it was the smell of safety, of home, of survival against odds that would defeat less adapted peoples. Children growing up in turf houses developed an intuitive understanding of natural materials and sustainable living that shaped their worldview, seeing resources not as infinite commodities to be exploited, but as precious gifts to be carefully managed and preserved. The construction techniques varied by region, with Icelandic builders developing different methods than their Norwegian or Greenland counterparts, each adaptation reflecting local materials, climate conditions, and cultural preferences while maintaining the core principles that made these structures so effective. Some turf houses included specialized rooms for different activities, weaving rooms where women created the textiles that were both necessity and trade good, storage rooms for preserving food through the long winters, and even primitive workshops where tools and weapons were maintained and repaired. The social dynamics within these confined spaces required sophisticated interpersonal skills. Privacy was minimal, conflicts had to be resolved quickly, and cooperation was not optional but essential for survival. Creating social structures that emphasized community over individualism. During construction, the entire community often participated, turning what could have been overwhelming individual tasks into social events that strengthened bonds while sharing knowledge and labor, a practice that ensured no family faced winter preparation alone. The orientation of these buildings showed careful consideration of prevailing winds, sun angles, and drainage patterns, knowledge accumulated over generations and passed down through oral tradition, each new house benefiting from the centuries of collective experience. Some wealthy Vikings enhanced their turf houses with imported materials, glass windows from distant lands, decorated door frames, and other luxuries. But the basic structure remained the same, proving that the design was optimal regardless of economic status. The transition zones between inside and outside were carefully designed, often featuring multiple doors and entrance chambers that served as airlocks, preventing the loss of precious heat while allowing necessary movement in and out of the structure. Archaeological evidence suggests that some turf houses were continuously occupied for centuries, with successive generations making small improvements and repairs while maintaining the original structure, a testament to both the durability of the design and the skills of the builders. The fire risk in these structures was carefully managed through stone-lined hearths, spark arresters made from iron mesh, and careful placement of flammable materials, showing a sophisticated understanding of fire safety in an age when a single spark could mean disaster. Women played a crucial role in maintaining these homes. Their knowledge of which turfs provided the best insulation, how to manage smoke flow, and when to refresh floor coverings being essential to the comfort and health of all inhabitants. The Viking turf house represents more than just a building technique. It embodies a philosophy of living with nature rather than against it, using the Earth's own insulating properties to create sustainable, comfortable homes that required minimal resources to build and maintain. As we face modern challenges of climate change, energy efficiency, and sustainable living, the wisdom embedded in these ancient structures offers valuable lessons, proving that our ancestors' solutions to environmental challenges deserve serious study and consideration. The fact that people voluntarily choose to build and live in turf houses today, not from necessity, but from a desire for sustainable, connected living, validates the Viking approach to architecture and challenges us to reconsider our own relationships with the built environment. When the last stone was placed and the final turf laid, a Viking family did not just have a house. They had a living partnership with the earth itself, a structure that would breathe with the seasons, grow stronger with time, and shelter generations yet unborn from whatever nature might bring. The fabric of survival, wrapped around Viking bodies, in the pre-dawn darkness of a Nordic winter morning, when breath crystallized instantly in the air, and exposed skin could suffer frostbite within minutes. The difference between life and death often came down to what covered your body, and the Vikings had transformed the simple sheep's wool into a sophisticated survival system that modern outdoor enthusiasts still struggle to match. The Viking approach to clothing, represented far more than just throwing on whatever was available. It was a carefully orchestrated system of layers, each serving specific functions, working together to create a microclimate around the body that could maintain life even in the most extreme conditions. Beginning with the innermost layer, Vikings wore a rough spun wool garment directly against their skin, a choice that might seem uncomfortable to modern sensibilities, accustomed to soft cotton. But this coarse wool served multiple crucial purposes that softer materials could never match. This base layer, often called a kirtil, was deliberately woven with a loose enough weave to trap air while still maintaining structural integrity, creating thousands of tiny pockets that would hold body heat while allowing moisture to escape, preventing the dangerous buildup of sweat that could freeze and kill. The wool for this layer came from specific parts of the sheep, usually the coarser outer coat that many modern wool producers discard. But Vikings knew this rougher fiber had superior water-resistant properties, maintaining its insulating capacity even when damp from sweat or external moisture. Over this base came a second woolen tunic, woven more tightly and often from finer wool. This layer provided the primary insulation while also serving as a barrier against wind, its closer weave preventing cold air from penetrating, while still allowing the garment to breathe. The construction of these garments showed remarkable sophistication, with sleeves designed to overlap at the wrists, necklines that could be adjusted for ventilation or warmth, and lengths calculated to provide maximum coverage while still allowing freedom of movement necessary for daily work. Women's clothing followed similar principles, but with modifications that reflected both practical needs and social customs. Their long wool dresses, called hangarocks, were essentially tubes of fabric that created excellent heat retention through the chimney effect of rising warm air. The famous Viking cloak, far from being merely decorative, represented perhaps the most versatile piece of their cold weather arsenal, serving as outerwear during the day, blanket at night, and emergency shelter when caught in storms far from home. These cloaks were typically made from the densest wool available, often specially treated with lanolin to enhance water resistance, and could weigh several pounds when dry, increasing significantly when wet, but never losing their life-saving insulating properties. The fastening systems for Viking clothing showed remarkable ingenuity, using brooches, pins, and toggles that could be operated with cold, stiff fingers, or even while wearing mittens. A crucial consideration when stopping to remove gloves could mean dangerous heat loss. Leg coverings consisted of wool trousers for men and thick wool leggings for both sexes, often wrapped with leather strips or fabric bands called weiningas that served multiple purposes, securing the fabric close to the leg, providing additional insulation, and preventing snow from entering boots. The layering extended to the extremities, with Vikings wearing multiple pairs of wool socks, sometimes stuffed with dried grass or moss for extra insulation, inside leather boots that were designed more for durability and water resistance than comfort. Hand coverings ranged from simple wool mittens, far superior to gloves for heat retention, to elaborate fur-lined gauntlets for the wealthy, but always with the understanding that keeping the core warm was more important than comfortable fingers. Head coverings were essential, with Vikings understanding that enormous amounts of body heat could be lost through an uncovered head, leading to the development of close-fitting wool caps, often lined with fur and designed to cover ears and neck. The quality of wool varied dramatically based on economic status, with wealthy Vikings wearing garments made from carefully selected fleeces, sometimes imported from regions known for superior sheep, while poorer folk made do with whatever their own flocks could provide. Color played a role beyond mere aesthetics, with darker colors preferred for outer garments, not just for their ability to absorb solar heat, but also because they showed dirt and wear less readily. Important considerations when washing clothes in winter was nearly impossible. The process of creating these woolen garments began long before the first thread was spun, with careful breeding of sheep to produce fleeces with the right combination of water resistance, insulation, and workability that survival demanded. Shearing happened at specific times to ensure the sheep could regrow adequate coats before winter, while providing Vikings with fleece at its prime, a delicate balance that required deep understanding of both animal husbandry and seasonal cycles. The preparation of wool involved multiple steps: cleaning, carding, combing, and spinning, often done during the long winter evenings when outdoor work was impossible, turning necessary clothing production into social occasions that strengthened community bonds. Different family members specialized in different aspects of clothing production, with children learning to card wool, teenagers spinning thread, and experienced adults handling the complex weaving that turned raw materials into life-saving garments. The looms used by Vikings were vertical constructions that could produce fabric of varying weights and weaves, operated by skilled weavers who understood how different patterns affected the thermal properties of the finished cloth. Dyeing was done with natural materials, lichens, roots, and berries, providing colors that ranged from deep browns to vibrant reds, with certain colors indicating social status or regional origin, creating a complex visual language readable to other Vikings. Repairs and maintenance of woolen garments were constant necessities, with Viking women carrying needle cases and thread as routinely as modern people carry phones, ready to mend tears before they could compromise the garment's protective properties. The concept of clothing as investment rather than disposable commodity shaped Viking society, with quality garments passed down through generations, carefully maintained and occasionally recut to fit new owners, each piece carrying history along with warmth. Children's clothing followed adult patterns, but with modifications for growth, extra fabric left in hems and seams that could be let out as needed, ensuring that precious wool was never wasted, and children remained protected through growth spurts. Seasonal variations in clothing were less about fashion and more about survival, with Vikings adding or removing layers based on activity levels, weather conditions, and available shelter, showing an intuitive understanding of thermoregulation. The integration of fur into clothing systems provided crucial enhancements, with fox, bear, and seal fur used not just for warmth, but strategically placed to protect vulnerable areas like wrists, necks, and faces from wind and cold. Trade networks developed specifically around clothing materials, with Iceland trading wool products for items they could not produce, creating economic systems that recognized clothing as essential for survival as food or shelter. The care of woolen garments extended their life dramatically, with Vikings understanding that properly maintained wool could last decades, developing techniques for storage, cleaning, and restoration that preserved these precious resources. Waterproofing techniques included rubbing garments with various fats and oils, creating a primitive but effective barrier against rain and snow while maintaining the breathability essential for active wear in cold conditions. The social significance of clothing went beyond mere protection, with specific garments indicating marital status, professional occupation, and regional origin. creating a complex semiotic system that conveyed information without words. During extreme cold events, Vikings would wear virtually every garment they owned simultaneously, creating layering systems that could include 5 or 6 tunics, multiple cloaks, and enough wool to double their body weight but save their lives. The production of a complete set of winter clothing for one person required the wool from multiple sheep, hundreds of hours of labor, and skills passed down through generations, making each garment precious beyond mere monetary value. Archaeological finds of Viking-age textiles reveal sophisticated weaving techniques, including twills, tablets weaving, and complex patterns that provided both decorative elements and functional benefits through varying fabric density. The Viking understanding of wool's properties extended to its behavior when burning, with clothing designed to char rather than melt, providing crucial seconds for escape if garments caught fire from the ever-present hearth flames. Different activities required different clothing configurations, with Vikings developing modular systems that could be quickly adjusted for indoor work, outdoor labor, or long-distance travel, each configuration optimized for specific thermal needs. The psychological comfort provided by proper clothing cannot be underestimated. Vikings facing dangerous winter conditions drew confidence from well-made garments, knowing their clothing would not fail them when survival depended on it. Modern analysis of Viking clothing reveals insulation values comparable to contemporary outdoor gear, achieved through intelligent design and material selection rather than high-tech fabrics, proving that wisdom trumps technology in survival situations. The legacy of Viking clothing design lives on in traditional Nordic garments still worn today, with patterns and techniques passed down through generations, preserving not just warmth but cultural identity and practical wisdom. When spring finally arrived and thick winter garments could be stored away, Vikings did not simply forget about them, but immediately began preparing for the next winter, repairing, improving, and ensuring that when cold returned, they would be ready. The Viking approach to clothing represents a masterclass in making do with available materials while achieving remarkable results, showing that survival depends less on having perfect equipment than on understanding and maximizing what you have. Every thread in Viking clothing served a purpose. Every design choice reflected hard-won knowledge, and every garment represented a victory over an environment that offered no second chances to those who faced it unprepared. Stones that held the memory of fire. When darkness fell across Viking settlements and the last log had been placed on the hearth, a different kind of magic began. One that transformed simple stones into reservoirs of warmth that would carry families through the dangerous hours when fires died and cold crept in like a patient predator. The Viking understanding of thermal mass and heat retention predated scientific terminology by centuries, but their practical application of these principles created heating systems that modern engineers study with admiration and surprise at their effectiveness. At the heart of every Viking home, literally and figuratively, sat the long hearth, a carefully constructed fire pit that served as kitchen, heater, social center, and sacred space. But its true genius lay not in the flames that danced above, but in the stones that lined its edges and filled its base. These were not random rocks gathered without thought, but carefully selected stones chosen for their density, heat retention properties, and resistance to cracking under thermal stress. Knowledge gained through generations of trial and error that cost lives when mistakes were made. The selection process for hearthstones resembled modern materials science, with Vikings testing different rock types by heating them repeatedly, observing which held heat longest, which transferred it most efficiently, and which could withstand years of thermal cycling without failing. Granite, basalt, and certain dense sandstones became preferred materials, their crystalline structures capable of absorbing enormous amounts of thermal energy during the evening fire and releasing it slowly through the night, creating a thermal battery that required no maintenance or fuel once charged. The arrangement of these stones followed patterns that maximized heat, absorption, and radiation, with larger stones forming the foundation and smaller ones creating channels that directed airflow for optimal combustion, while ensuring maximum stone surface area contacted the flames. During the active burning phase, families oriented their evening activities around the hearth, not just for immediate warmth, but as part of the heating strategy, ensuring stones received hours of intense heat that would penetrate deep into their mass, storing energy for later release. The practice of banking fires, partially smothering flames with ash to slow combustion while maintaining heat, worked in conjunction with the heated stones, creating a system where minimal fuel could provide warmth through an entire night, if managed correctly. Some Vikings took stone heating to another level, placing specially selected rocks directly in the coals during the day, then wrapping these portable heaters in leather or thick cloth to carry to sleeping areas, creating prehistoric hot water bottles that could maintain warmth for hours. The placement of heated stones extended beyond the hearth, with some families creating channels beneath sleeping platforms where hot stones could be placed, an early form of radiant floor heating that provided comfort unimaginable to those who had never experienced it. Children learned early the dangerous dance of managing hot stones, using long-handled tools to move them safely, understanding that these glowing rocks represented both comfort and danger, requiring respect and skill to handle without injury. The temperature gradient created by stone heating was remarkably even, unlike the fierce heat near an active fire followed by cold beyond its reach. Heated stones provided gentle, consistent warmth that penetrated clothing and bedding without the risk of burns or fire. Wealthy Vikings enhanced their stone heating systems with imported rocks known for superior thermal properties, sometimes trading valuable goods for specific stones from distant quarries, showing that comfort was worth a significant investment when survival was at stake. The maintenance of hearthstones became a specialized skill, knowing when stones had absorbed microfractures that made them dangerous, when to replace them, and how to position new stones for optimal performance while the system remained in daily use. Some innovative Vikings created double hearth systems, one for cooking and active heating, another filled with stones specifically for overnight warmth, allowing them to maximize heat storage while maintaining functional cooking facilities. The acoustic properties of heated stones added another dimension to their value. The gentle ticking and popping as they cooled, providing auditory comfort in the dark, a sound that meant warmth was still present, even if flames had died. Women often controlled stone heating management. Their intimate knowledge of each stone's properties, which heated fastest, which held heat longest, which were prone to cracking, representing crucial household wisdom, passed from mother to daughter. The integration of stone heating with other warming strategies created synergistic effects, heated stones warming the air that wool clothing trapped, creating microclimates of comfort even in large, drafty halls where heating the entire space was impossible. During extreme cold events, Vikings would create stone heating circles, arranging multiple heated rocks around sleeping areas to create zones of warmth that could mean the difference between restful sleep and dangerous hypothermia. The communal aspect of stone heating strengthened social bonds, with families sharing particularly good heating stones, trading knowledge about optimal arrangements, and helping elderly neighbors manage their heating systems during harsh weather. Archaeological excavations reveal sophisticated stone heating arrangements, including evidence of metal grates that held stones at optimal heights, channels that directed heat flow, and even primitive temperature regulation through adjustable stone placement. The psychological comfort of heated stones extended beyond mere physical warmth. The presence of these glowing rocks representing human mastery over cold, a tangible reminder that intelligence and preparation could overcome natural challenges. Different activities required different stone heating strategies, with craft work areas using flat heated stones as work surfaces that kept materials pliable, while sleeping areas emphasized steady, gentle heat that would not disturb rest. The seasonal rhythm of stone selection and preparation became part of Viking life, with autumn gathering expeditions to locate ideal rocks, testing and positioning them before winter's arrival. Ensuring heating systems were optimized before need became critical. Some Vikings developed specialized containers for heated stones, ceramic or metal vessels that could hold multiple hot rocks while preventing accidental contact, creating portable heating units that could be moved as needed throughout the night. The knowledge of which local stone sources provided the best heating rocks became valuable community information, jealously guarded in some cases, freely shared in others, but always recognized as essential survival intelligence. Children's sleeping areas often received special attention in stone heating arrangements, with smaller, carefully selected stones that provided gentle warmth without risk, teaching young Vikings from infancy that stones could be allies against cold. The interaction between stone heating and building design created feedback loops of improvement, with hearth placement, ventilation systems, and living space arrangements evolving to maximize the effectiveness of heated stone systems. Trade in specialty heating stones developed in some regions, with particularly effective rocks becoming valuable commodities, shipped along Viking trade routes to areas where local geology provided inferior options for thermal mass heating. The religious and spiritual significance of hearthstones added another layer to their importance, with some families maintaining sacred stones that had heated their homes for generations, physical links to ancestors who had survived through their warmth. Modern experiments with recreated Viking stone heating systems consistently surprise researchers with their effectiveness, providing steady heat for 8 to 12 hours from a single firing, efficiency levels that challenge assumptions about primitive technology. The Viking stone heating legacy influences modern masonry heaters and thermal mass design, with contemporary builders rediscovering principles that Nordic peoples perfected through centuries of practical application and survival necessity. When morning came and stones had given up their last heat, the cycle began again. But the knowledge that these simple rocks could store sunlight and firelight, holding warmth like patient servants until needed, gave Vikings confidence to face another day. The genius of Viking stone heating lay not in complexity, but in profound understanding of natural principles, showing that survival technology need not be complicated to be effective, only deeply understood and skillfully applied. Every heated stone in a Viking home represented stored security, banked comfort, and the accumulated wisdom of generations who had learned that fire's gift could be preserved in rock, waiting patiently to return warmth when darkness and cold pressed closest, preserving summer's bounty for winter's hunger. In the depths of a Nordic winter, when snow lay 6 feet deep and hunting was impossible, when livestock grew thin on carefully rationed feed, and children's eyes grew large with hunger, the difference between thriving and starving often came down to what had been sealed away months before in clay vessels that held more than food. They held life itself. The Viking approach to food preservation transcended simple necessity, becoming an art form that combined chemistry, biology, and physics in ways that modern food scientists recognize as remarkably sophisticated, achieving results that kept families fed through months when nature provided nothing. The process began not with preservation itself, but with planning, Vikings calculating precisely how much food each family member would need through the long winter, adding generous margins for unexpected guests, failed harvests, or winters that stretched longer than usual. Clay pots, the unsung heroes of Viking survival, were crafted with specific characteristics in mind: thick walls that insulated contents, glazes that prevented moisture infiltration, and shapes that maximized storage efficiency while minimizing surface area exposed to air. The selection of clay for these vessels involved understanding soil composition, with potters seeking specific clay types that would fire to create non-porous containers capable of maintaining airtight seals for months without degradation or contamination. Preparing food for long-term storage required different techniques than simple cooking, with meats cooked slowly in their own fats until thoroughly done, vegetables blanched to halt enzyme action, and grains toasted to remove moisture while adding flavor complexity. The star of Viking preservation was rendered fat, whether from pigs, cattle, or seals. This pure fat served multiple roles: cooking medium, preservative calorie source, and airtight seal that prevented oxidation and bacterial growth. The process of rendering fat required skill and patience, slowly heating animal tissues until pure fat separated from proteins, then clarifying this fat until it became a clear, stable medium that could preserve food for months without refrigeration. Once food was cooked and containers prepared, the layering process began, alternating prepared meats, vegetables, and grains with generous amounts of hot fat that would solidify into an impermeable barrier, protecting the food beneath from air and contamination. The final seal represented the most critical step: a thick layer of pure fat poured over the contents, sometimes mixed with beeswax for extra protection, creating an anaerobic environment where harmful bacteria could not survive while beneficial preservation occurred. Some Vikings enhanced their preservation with salt, herbs, and fermentation, creating complex flavors while extending storage life, turning necessity into culinary tradition that influenced Nordic cuisine for generations to come. The storage of these sealed vessels required careful consideration, with Vikings creating specialized storage areas that maintained consistent cool temperatures, protected containers from physical damage, and allowed easy access even in deep snow. Underground storage pits, lined with stones and covered with turf, created natural refrigeration that kept preserved foods at ideal temperatures, too warm to freeze and damage containers, too cool to accelerate spoilage even if seals failed. The knowledge of when to seal foods proved as crucial as how, with Vikings timing preservation to coincide with peak nutritional content, optimal weather conditions, and family labor availability, creating annual rhythms that structured community life. Different foods required different preservation approaches, with fatty meats storing best in pure fat, vegetables often fermented before sealing, and fish dried and smoked before packing in oil. each technique maximizing nutritional retention while preventing spoilage. The communal aspect of food preservation strengthened Viking society, with families helping each other during intensive preservation periods, sharing knowledge, labor, and resources, while ensuring no family faced winter without adequate supplies. Women predominantly controlled food preservation knowledge, their expertise in judging fat quality, seasoning combinations, and storage timing representing critical survival skills passed through generations of practical application and refinement. The opening of preserved food vessels became winter celebrations, carefully planned to distribute resources through the cold months while maintaining reserves for emergencies, turning necessity into social occasions that brighten dark days. Quality control was built into the preservation process, with Vikings developing sensory tests for fat purity, seal integrity, and food safety that prevented catastrophic losses from improperly preserved supplies. The caloric density of fat-preserved foods provided crucial energy during winter, when maintaining body temperature required significantly more calories than summer activities, making these preserved supplies literal lifesavers. Children learned preservation techniques through observation and gradual participation, understanding that summer's work determined winter's survival, creating deep connections between seasonal labor and family well-being. The variety achieved through different preservation methods prevented menu monotony, with Vikings creating dozens of variations using basic ingredients, spices, and techniques that turned potentially boring winter meals into anticipated treats. Archaeological evidence reveals sophisticated preservation practices, with intact vessels showing layering patterns, residue analysis confirming complex seasoning use, and storage facilities demonstrating understanding of temperature control and moisture management. The economic implications of food preservation extended beyond survival, with successfully preserved surplus becoming trade goods, allowing Vikings to exchange preserved foods for materials, tools, or luxuries unavailable locally. Religious and cultural practices surrounded food preservation, with rituals ensuring divine blessing on stored supplies, taboos about breaking seals prematurely, and celebrations marking successful completion of preservation seasons. The psychological security provided by well-stocked storage areas cannot be overstated. Vikings facing winter storms drew comfort from knowing sealed vessels held months of sustenance, reducing anxiety and allowing focus on other survival needs. Failed preservation could mean disaster, teaching Vikings to diversify their methods, never relying on single techniques or storage locations, spreading risk across multiple preservation strategies and storage sites. The tools used for preservation, specialized ladles, sealing implements, and testing devices became treasured family possessions, often decorated and passed down through generations as symbols of survival wisdom. Seasonal variations in preservation needs created annual cycles, with different months optimal for different preservation activities, structuring Viking life around natural rhythms that modern industrial food systems have largely forgotten. The integration of preserved foods into daily meals required culinary creativity, with Vikings developing cooking techniques that transformed stored ingredients into appetizing dishes. Maintaining morale through the monotonous winter months. Trade networks developed around preservation supplies, with salt, spices, and high-quality fats becoming valuable commodities, creating economic systems that recognized food preservation as essential infrastructure for northern survival. The knowledge embedded in Viking food preservation techniques influences modern artisanal food movements, with traditional methods rediscovered and adapted for contemporary use, proving that ancient wisdom remains relevant. When spring finally arrived and fresh foods became available, Vikings did not abandon their preservation practices, but immediately began planning for the next winter. Understanding that survival required constant preparation and that each season's abundance must be captured for times of scarcity, the science behind Viking preservation methods reveals a sophisticated understanding of microbiology centuries before germ theory, with practices that created environments hostile to harmful bacteria, while promoting beneficial fermentation processes that enhanced nutrition and flavor. Modern food safety experts studying Viking preservation techniques express amazement at their effectiveness, with properly sealed fat-preserved foods remaining edible for years under proper storage conditions, achieving shelf stability that challenges contemporary industrial methods. The cultural legacy of Viking food preservation lives on in traditional Nordic dishes, from Swedish surströmming to Icelandic hakkarl, extreme foods that originated as survival necessities but became cultural markers. Connecting modern Scandinavians to their ancestors through taste, every sealed pot in a Viking storage room represented hope, crystallized into ceramic and fat. The promise that winter's hunger would be met with summer's plenty, transformed through skill and knowledge into sustenance that could sustain life through any hardship. The night watch that saved lives. In the absolute darkness of a Nordic winter night, when the last ember threatened to fade and cold pressed against the walls like a living thing seeking entry, the Vikings employed their most powerful survival tool, not axes or swords, but human consciousness itself, organized into shifts that kept the spark of life burning through the dangerous hours. The practice of sleeping in shifts represented more than mere fire tending. It was a sophisticated social technology that transformed individual vulnerability into collective strength, ensuring that someone always stood guard against the twin threats of cold and darkness that claimed so many lives. Unlike modern shift work designed for productivity, Viking night watches were matters of life and death, where a sleeping household could wake to find their fire dead, their water frozen, and their bodies already succumbing to hypothermia's deadly embrace. The organization of these shifts reflected deep understanding of human physiology and psychology, with Vikings recognizing that certain people naturally functioned better at different times, creating schedules that matched individual circadian rhythms to maximize alertness when it mattered most. Typically, the night was divided into 4 watches, each lasting roughly 3 hours, though these divisions flexed with the seasons, expanding during the interminable winter nights when darkness could last 20 hours in the far north. The first watch, beginning at nightfall, often fell to adolescents and young adults, their energy still high from the day's activities, their eyes sharp enough to manage tasks by firelight, while others prepared for sleep. These early watchers did more than simply stare at flames. They performed essential tasks like preparing materials for the next day's fire, checking on livestock, and ensuring all openings were properly sealed against drafts that could steal precious heat. The middle watches, the coldest and most dangerous hours, typically went to the most experienced adults, those who understood the subtle signs of a dying fire, who could judge exactly how much fuel to add without wasting resources or creating dangerous flare-ups. The final watch before dawn often belonged to elders, or those who naturally woke early, their years of experience allowing them to prepare the household for the coming day, while maintaining the critical warmth that had sustained life through the night. The knowledge passed during these quiet hours was invaluable, with watchers sharing stories, skills, and wisdom that daylight activities never allowed time for, creating an educational system that operated in the margins of survival. Children learned responsibility through graduated participation in night watches, first accompanying adults, then taking short shifts under supervision, finally earning the trust to guard their family's warmth alone, a rite of passage that marked the transition to adulthood. The tools of the night watcher were simple but essential: iron pokers for stirring coals, leather bellows for reviving dying flames, and containers of dry kindling positioned where they could be found by touch in absolute darkness. Beyond fire management, night watchers served as the household's immune system, alert to sounds that might indicate problems, from wolves testing doors to roof beams creaking under snow load, ready to wake others if threats exceeded one person's ability to handle. The psychological burden of night watching was significant. Hours spent alone with only dying firelight for company, responsible for lives that depended on maintaining warmth, creating mental pressures that required strong personalities and community support. Some households developed elaborate systems for night watches, including marked candles that showed time passage, specific songs or stories assigned to different hours, and physical tokens passed between watchers to ensure smooth transitions. The social dynamics of shift assignment revealed Viking values, with prestigious middle watches going to those who had proven reliability, while those who had failed in their duties might find themselves assigned extra shifts or paired with experienced watchers for retraining. Women often controlled night watch scheduling. Their understanding of family members' strengths and weaknesses, allowing optimal assignments that balanced fairness with effectiveness, ensuring critical hours had the most capable guardians. The integration of night watching with other survival strategies created multiplicative effects. Watchers could tend heating stones, monitor food preservation, and perform quiet crafts, maximizing productivity during hours that might otherwise be lost. During illness or injury, night watch modifications showed Viking community solidarity, with neighbors taking shifts for struggling households, ensuring no family faced the dangerous choice between rest and warmth when dealing with health crises. The knowledge, gained from thousands of hours of night watching, accumulated into expertise that influenced Viking navigation and exploration, with sailors applying lessons learned from managing household fires to maintaining shipboard warmth during long voyages. Religious and spiritual practices often accompanied night watches, with watchers performing rituals to protect against evil spirits thought to be most active in darkness, combining practical fire tending with spiritual household protection. The physical effects of night watching shaped Viking society, with watchers developing exceptional night vision, heightened hearing, and the ability to function on segmented sleep patterns that modern researchers recognize as historically normal human sleep cycles. Economic activities during night watches included fiber preparation, tool maintenance, and other quiet crafts that could be performed by firelight, turning necessary vigil hours into productive time that contributed to household wealth. The stories told during night watches became the backbone of Viking oral tradition, with tales refined through countless retellings in the quiet hours, creating the narrative traditions that would eventually be written down as sagas. Seasonal variations in night watching reflected changing dangers, with summer watches focusing on security and predator deterrence, while winter watches prioritized warmth maintenance and weather monitoring, each season bringing its own challenges. The training of effective night watchers began in childhood with games and exercises designed to build necessary skills, teaching children to judge time without clocks, maintain fires without waste, and stay alert without external stimulation. Archaeological evidence of Viking hearths shows modifications specifically for night watching, including stone seats positioned for optimal fire viewing, tool storage within arm's reach, and sight lines allowing watchers to monitor multiple areas. The psychological techniques developed for staying alert during long watches influenced Viking military practices, with similar shift systems used during sieges, sea voyages, and campaign camps, applying household survival strategies to warfare. Communication between shifts required standardized practices, with watchers leaving specific signs about fire status, fuel supplies, and any incidents, creating information transfer systems that ensured continuity across changing personnel. The selection of firewood for night use showed sophisticated understanding, with watchers choosing woods that burned slowly and steadily rather than those that gave quick heat, maximizing burn time while minimizing the need for frequent tending. Some wealthy households employed dedicated night watchers, creating an early profession that combined fire management, security, and household maintenance. Though most Vikings considered family watch duties essential for building character and ensuring everyone understood survival requirements. The health impacts of disrupted sleep from night watching were managed through Viking understanding of recovery needs, with watchers given reduced daytime duties and opportunities for rest that recognize the physical toll of maintaining nighttime vigilance. Children born during night watches often received names reflecting the circumstances, creating family histories embedded in naming traditions that connected individuals to the survival struggles that enabled their existence. The tools and techniques of night watching evolved through generations, with innovations in fire management, timing methods, and cold weather clothing, driven by the experiences of countless watchers seeking to make their duties more bearable. Modern sleep researchers studying Viking patterns recognize the biphasic sleep patterns created by night watches as potentially more natural than contemporary continuous sleep, suggesting Vikings accidentally optimized human alertness cycles through survival necessity. The legacy of Viking night watches lives on in Nordic traditions of candle lighting, fire ceremonies, and winter vigils that echo the life-saving practices of ancestors who understood that someone must always keep watch against the dark when dawn finally broke, and the night's last watcher could wake the household to a warm home. The victory was quiet but profound. Another night survived, another day earned through vigilance, cooperation, and the understanding that survival required sacrificing individual comfort for collective security. The Viking Night Watch system represents human cooperation at its finest, showing that our ancestors survived not through individual strength alone, but through social organizations that transformed human consciousness into a tool for defeating environmental challenges. Every person who took their turn tending fires through long dark hours contributed to an unbroken chain of warmth stretching across generations. Each shift a link, ensuring the flame of civilization continued burning despite nature's best efforts to extinguish it. The wisdom that echoes through time as we stand at the threshold of an uncertain future, facing climate instability, infrastructure fragility, and growing recognition that our modern systems may not be as robust as we assumed. The Viking survival strategies we have explored offer more than historical curiosity. They provide blueprints for resilience that remain startlingly relevant. The turf houses that seemed primitive to industrial age observers now inspire architects seeking sustainable, energy-efficient buildings that work with rather than against natural systems. proving that Viking builders understood principles we are only rediscovering. Modern homesteaders studying Viking clothing systems find wisdom that synthetic fabrics cannot match, learning that wool's seemingly simple properties hide complex advantages that no laboratory has successfully replicated, from fire resistance to wet insulation. The stone heating techniques that warmed Viking halls through endless winter nights inform contemporary thermal mass design, with builders incorporating rock walls, stone floors, and masonry heaters that operate on principles Vikings perfected through practical application. Food preservation methods developed in Viking settlements influence artisanal food movements worldwide, as people rediscover that traditional techniques create flavors and nutrition industrial processing cannot match, while providing food security without refrigeration. The social organization represented by night watches offers lessons for modern communities facing emergencies, showing that survival depends less on individual preparation than on collective cooperation and willingness to share burdens for common benefit. These were not primitive people stumbling through darkness, but sophisticated survivors who understood that true wealth lay not in gold or silver, but in knowledge, community, and practices that ensured another spring would come regardless of winter's fury. The Viking legacy challenges our assumptions about progress, suggesting that newer is not always better, and that complexity does not equal superiority, and that wisdom accumulated over generations may surpass innovations that have not yet faced true tests. In an age where a power outage can cripple entire cities, where supply chains stretch across continents, and where most people have lost basic survival skills, Viking practices offer alternative models for human persistence through adversity. The psychological insights embedded in Viking survival go beyond mere technique, showing that facing harsh realities directly, preparing methodically, and accepting nature's power while working within its constraints creates resilience. Modern comfort-seeking often lacks. Each Viking innovation emerged from necessity, filtered through intelligence, creating solutions elegant in their simplicity, profound in their effectiveness, and accessible to anyone willing to observe, learn, and apply ancient wisdom to contemporary challenges. The community bonds forged through shared survival challenges created societies where individual success meant little without collective thriving, a lesson particularly relevant as modern isolation threatens both physical and psychological well-being. Viking children grew up understanding that survival skills were not optional education, but essential knowledge, learning through participation rather than theory, developing competencies that ensured they could contribute to family survival from young ages. The gender dynamics in Viking survival showed practical egalitarianism, with vital knowledge distributed based on skill rather than rigid roles, ensuring survival wisdom was preserved across multiple carriers who could teach and maintain essential practices. Trade networks that developed around survival goods and knowledge created economies based on real value rather than artificial scarcity, with items priced according to their contribution to survival rather than status or fashion. The spiritual dimensions of Viking survival practices remind us that humans need meaning as much as warmth, with rituals and beliefs that transformed necessary labor into sacred acts, connecting individuals to larger purposes. Modern preppers studying Viking methods find that historical examples provide tested solutions to problems they are trying to solve theoretically, offering proven approaches refined through centuries of practical application. The environmental harmony achieved by Viking practices, using renewable materials, working with natural cycles, and creating no waste that nature could not absorb, offers models for sustainable living that technology has yet to improve upon. Educational systems could learn from Viking approaches that made survival knowledge central rather than peripheral, ensuring every community member possessed basic competencies that industrial specialization has allowed us to forget. The Vikings faced their challenges without believing someone else would save them, taking responsibility for their own survival while recognizing that individual preparation meant nothing without community cooperation and shared knowledge. Climate change makes Viking adaptability newly relevant, as their ability to thrive in marginal environments using available resources provides templates for communities facing environmental shifts that may make current practices obsolete. The mental resilience developed through Viking survival practices, accepting hardship as normal rather than exceptional, preparing constantly for challenges, and finding joy despite difficulties, offers psychological models for contemporary struggles. Each technique we have explored represents accumulated wisdom that cost lives to develop, knowledge earned through suffering that we can now access freely if we are humble enough to learn from ancestors who faced greater challenges with fewer resources. The Viking understanding that comfort is temporary, but wisdom endures shaped practices designed for transmission across generations, creating cultural DNA that preserved survival knowledge through social upheavals that destroyed written records. Modern technology offers tools Vikings could not imagine, but combining contemporary capabilities with Viking wisdom creates synergies neither approach achieves alone. Using ancient principles enhanced by modern materials and methods, the stories of Viking survival inspire not through romanticized adventure, but through recognition that ordinary people faced extraordinary challenges and prevailed through intelligence, cooperation, and sheer determination to see another spring. As we face our own winters, whether literal or metaphorical, the Viking example reminds us that humans have survived worse with less, that community trumps technology, and that wisdom accumulated over generations deserves respect and study. The 5 survival techniques explored here represent just fragments of Viking knowledge, glimpses into a comprehensive survival system that enabled expansion across the North Atlantic and establishment of settlements in environments others deemed uninhabitable. Future generations may judge our society by how well we preserve and transmit survival knowledge, whether we maintain abilities to thrive without complex infrastructure, and whether we remember that civilization is always only a few cold nights away from collapse. The Vikings left us more than artifacts and sagas. They left proof that humans can adapt to any environment, survive any winter, and build thriving communities in the harshest conditions if they possess the wisdom, will, and community bonds to persist. Their legacy calls us to develop our own survival wisdom, adapted to contemporary challenges but informed by historical successes, creating modern practices that honor ancient knowledge while addressing current realities. When the next crisis comes, whether personal or societal, those who have studied Viking survival will possess advantages beyond mere technique, understanding that survival is as much mental as physical, as much social as individual. The Viking story continues in every person who chooses preparedness over complacency, community over isolation, and wisdom over mere comfort, carrying forward traditions that ensure humanity's persistence through whatever challenges await. Let the lessons of the north wind guide us, the wisdom of the hearth warm us, and the example of those who survived impossible winters inspire us to build our own resilience for whatever storms approach on our horizons. In the end, the Vikings' greatest gift to us is not any single technique, but the proof that humans can survive anything if they face reality honestly. Prepare thoroughly, cooperate completely, and never forget that spring always returns to those who persist through winter. The fire still burns, the knowledge still lives, and the wisdom of the Vikings awaits all who are humble enough to learn from those who paid for every lesson with blood, sweat, and the determination to see their children survive another year. As you face your own challenges, remember that you carry within you the same capacity for adaptation, the same potential for innovation, and the same ability to transform hardship into wisdom that enabled Vikings to thrive where others saw only death. The journey through Viking survival wisdom ends here, but your own journey of preparation, learning, and resilience has only just begun, informed by ancient knowledge, but directed toward future challenges that will require all the wisdom we can gather. May your hearth stay warm, your stores stay full, and your community stay strong. As you apply these timeless lessons to modern life, proving that Viking wisdom lives on in all who choose preparedness over complacency and wisdom over mere survival.